All right, and we are live with a very special episode of Mentor Minutes. If it's Friday and you see me here, it probably means that I'm going to be discussing a book. And this book today is The One Thing by Gary Keller that I will be reviewing and discussing, summarizing, and hitting the highlights. The idea behind these is for the foreseeable future, I will be discussing one leadership and management book every Thursday or Friday, depending on what my schedule is. And I'm just going to be summarizing the main points of the book and then pulling out some of the highlights that jumped out to me and that I think apply in frontline leadership and management that I think help enlighten some extra points. Now, with most of these things, there is always some nugget of wisdom that you can get in these books, and I hope to be able to inspire some of you to actually pick up some of these. I know that a few people have reached out to me. They haven't had a chance to read this one in particular, but they just received it through Amazon or whatever. And it's just a method to go along with these Mentor Minute sessions of just giving you some practice thinking about leadership. If you want to get better at something, and this goes for leadership in your career as well, then you need to spend time practicing. And so these sessions of going through questions and answers like I do on regular episodes, or pulling out some highlights and some things to think about in some of these books, are a great way for you to practice that leadership mindset and get you thinking in that so that you can help move your career forward. So to dive kind of right into it with the one thing, the summary that I would give for what Gary Keller is getting at in this book is that you want to do what he calls an extreme Pareto principle. Now, the Pareto principle, you've heard it either called out as the Pareto principle or called the 80-20 rule. And that is that 20% of any of your inputs get 80% of your outputs. That means 20% of the things that you work on produce 80% of the benefits. And you see this played out in a number of different ways, and I know that I've seen it personally. You know, not all actions are created equal. But what Gary Keller talks about here is taking it to another level. So it isn't just taking, say, your to-do list and doing an 80-20 analysis on your to-do list and finding the 20% of things that you need to work on. No, then take the 20% of the 20% and maybe even the 20% of that 20%. And so you hone in on one thing. And I may screw it up here, but the idea is to get focused on one particular thing and then focus on one action. What is the one thing that I can do today to work towards my goal that will make everything else unnecessary or easier? That's kind of the mantra, and we'll go over that as we go through the book. But I've seen that kind of play out in my own life. I'll share two of them with you. So when we talk, say, like mind, body, and spirit, so I have goals for each one of those. But I kind of isolated in utilizing this book, and I actually read it. I've read it several times over the past year and reread it again just for this session. But so for personally, my goal body-wise is to lose another 25 pounds. If I lose 25 more pounds, that will make so many other things easier. My blood pressure will naturally come down. My blood work will come more in line. It'll be easier for me to run a marathon, which is something that I'm working towards. So that one goal, that one thing of losing that weight makes everything else easier. Okay? The other thing, as far as the mind is concerned, a goal over the next year of reading 100 books. All right? That's one of the reasons that we're doing these Friday sessions, is because I want some of those books to be applicable for leadership and management. And so that one thing, if I focus on that one thing, that will feed my mind so much information. It will help develop my career a little bit more as far as being able to bring more to this leadership and development work. So what is that one thing? And then you ask yourself every day, what is the one thing that I can do today so that by doing it, everything else becomes easier or unnecessary. All right, so you focus on a big goal that works towards something, some long-term vision. We'll go through kind of the process that Gary Keller lays out here. And then you isolate that down to one particular action. And what that does is that focuses you on your biggest priorities. You hear me talk about the first 15 minutes of your day as a leader and how you need to make that part, something that you're focusing on in your priorities in that first 15 minutes. If you focus on your priorities in the first 15 minutes, the first thing in the day, you're going to be more likely to be able to carry the momentum, pick them up along the way, and get them finished over the course of the day instead of going home at the end of the day going, I didn't accomplish anything I set out to do today. So similar principles. And so we'll dive kind of into the details. And before I dive into these details, next Thursday, because I'm heading out for a wedding on Friday, so it'll be a Thursday one. Next Friday, I'm going to be going over Who Moved My Cheese by Spencer Johnson. Fantastic, nice, short read that you can get into. And it's actually a book that I probably in the last decade of my career, I gave to every single supervisor who I oversaw. So every supervisor that came in, or when I got a new job, every supervisor that I oversaw, I gave Who Moved My Cheese, because change management is such an important thing. So we'll be discussing that next week. I got a little shout out for that, but you can kind of see in the notes here what we have on tap over the next few weeks. So diving into The One Thing by Spencer Johnson, by Gary Keller. And I'll just kind of read out the quotes and kind of give my thoughts on it, and that is, unfortunately, many would get most of the things done, but not necessarily what mattered. Results suffered, frustration followed. So he's talking about an example here, and we've seen it all the time. As a leader, you give your team a bunch of tasks to do. You give them 5 things to do. And lo and behold, what often happens, unless you have a highly accountable environment, what happens is only 3 of those 5 things get done. So at the end of the week, you say, okay, well, did you get this done? No, we didn't get that done. Well, and you kind of have that question. Oh no, but we got this and this and this done. Well, that was great, except for those were priorities 3, 4, and 5, and you didn't do priorities 1 and 2. And so the idea behind The One Thing is to focus on getting that one thing done. You don't give, say, your team, the practical application is you don't give your team 5 things to do. You give them 1 thing to do. And when they are done with that 1 thing, then you get them working on the second thing. Doesn't always apply in everything that you might give your team, but for yourself, it is essential. All right? It is essential that you focus on your highest priorities and get those things across the finish line. The mantra and the thing that I want you to keep in mind, and this is what you wake up for every day, this is what he's talking about here, is what's the one thing you can do this week such that by doing it, everything else would be easier or unnecessary? What is one thing that you can do to reach your goals today that would make your overall goal, the one thing that you can do today to reach your overall goals for the quarter, for the year? So you isolate that one thing, and by bringing that focus to it, you get more accomplished. Where he discusses some of the things in his past career, and that is where I'd had huge success. I had narrowed my concentration down to one thing, and where my success varied, my focus had varied onto multiple things as well. So if you want to look to get more accomplished, and there's some good quotes in here that will kind of touch on that a little bit more. If you want to get more accomplished, you have to focus on getting the most important thing done. Because too many times we get a lot of work done, but we don't actually get what we need to get done off of our plate. And we all can recognize that as far as our to-do list and the important things that have been on there. Here, it's Friday. There are probably some things that were important that you needed to get done this week that were on your list on Monday, but lo and behold, you still haven't gotten them done on Friday. Don't feel bad. Most of us are in that sort of boat. But this is that philosophy that gets you thinking on this. And not for nothing, the book itself is 200 some odd pages long, but it actually moves very quickly. So it's a book that you can get through. I think the audio recording on it is something like 5 hours or something like that. So you can get through it relatively quickly. And I recommend definitely picking up this book. There's going to be some things that you can definitely take away from it. Now, he goes into, that's the philosophy. Focus on that one thing. Focus on your priority and doing one thing that gets the ball rolling. And he talks about the sequential action of knocking out these dominoes becomes a geometric progression down the road. And so he draws the example that's used that if you push over a domino can actually push over another domino that weighs 50% more. And so they've done studies on this where you end up, it's like 8 dominoes, and you end up with a domino that's 3 feet high or something like that and weighs 10 pounds. And so you start with a simple domino and it keeps going over. If you get out to like the 57th domino, that one little domino that you pushed over could push over a domino that's the distance between the Earth and the Moon. Huge geometric progression, but it is one thing. And so he talks about, and I don't want to call it a promise because it doesn't work in every instance, but it is certainly the hope, and that is that every time you push over one domino, every day, every month, every quarter, it pushes over a domino that gets more and more and more impactful and more important. So that's kind of the idea behind it. Now, the 6 lies, he identifies 6 lies between you and your success. And these are lies that everybody tells themselves. And you get caught up in many of these. The first lie is that everything matters equally. Well, that's the heart of this, the 80-20 principle. Not everything matters equally. Look at your to-do list. There are some things that are more important than others. Recognize that and take action on that as well. All right? Everything isn't always important. This next lie is multitasking. The third lie is a disciplined life. That's what you're really looking for, is that discipline. And he kind of flips that a little bit. That was the chapter that was a little tough to get through a little bit, but then I kind of got what he was getting at. Not discipline, but something else. Willpower is always on will call. You always just say, hey, where there is a will, there is a way. But there is plenty of scientific research in regards to willpower, and we'll get into some of that. The 5th lie that you tell is that you want to have a balanced life. All right? And that may back you away from it a little, but we'll kind of explain it there, and it makes a lot of sense what he's saying. And the 6th thing is big is bad. All right? Having something big has some bad qualities to it. That's the lie that you tell yourself. And these 6 lies inhibit you from making the sort of steps towards success that you want to. If you clear out these lies, you start clearing out your pathways to success. So diving into it just a little bit, and this is kind of talking about the extreme Pareto and that one thing. All right, so he starts off with what I kind of summarized at the beginning of this book discussion, and that is the majority of what you want will come from the minority of what you do. Extraordinary results are disproportionately created by fewer actions than most realize. And this is getting into not everything matters equally. The discussions that you have, the actions that you take, the reports that you do, all of those things, you might be able to take your day. And most of us can do this. Dial it back and look at yesterday. And you can probably say that you were in the office for 8 or 9 hours. But 7 of those hours were spent on things that weren't particularly driving everybody towards the goals. However, you did spend maybe 1 hour doing something that was demonstrably important to reaching the goals and achieving what you all set out to do as far as your career and as far as the department and organization is concerned. Andres, good to see you here, by the way, and appreciate the shout out on that one. So not everything matters equally. You have to focus on those things that matter most. And the idea is that you put a laser focus behind them, and then that is going to help you get past those, and that's one more domino that you push over. And if you keep pushing those dominoes over sequentially, you'll start getting geometrically progressive results with it. That's the idea. All right? It's not that we have too little time to do all of the things we need to do. I love this point. It's not that we have too little time to do all the things we need to do. It's that we feel the need to do too many things in the time we have. It's not that we have too much time. It's that we're trying to stuff too many things into the time that we have. All right, this is starting to get into the second point, which is the multitasking part. Researchers estimate that workers are interrupted every 11 minutes and then spend almost a third of their day recovering from these distractions. I've seen this played out in a number of different studies where the interruptions that take place in the average workplace today actually cause a decrease in productivity by 25 to 41%. I've seen it as high as 41% in getting back on track with where you were, as opposed to if the distraction didn't take place in the first place. All right? So getting into some of the lies that we tell ourselves, kind of summarizing, not everything is created equal. The majority of the results that you're going to get are going to come from the minority of what you do. You isolate those things, that minority, and focus on getting those done, and then you can get more results. Multitasking is not something that is going to help you accomplish more. Quite frankly, it accomplishes less. And I like the way he phrases it right here. Every time we try to do 2 or more things at once, we're simply dividing up our focus and dumbing down all of the outcomes in the process. All right? So the more things that you try to do at the same time, all you're doing, you're not creating more pie, shall we say. You're just splitting up the pie. Some things are more equal than others, that's right. Funny, Brian. I like that one. So multitasking, and I'm not going to belabor that. I mean, if you still think that multitasking is a good idea, then you need to just do a little bit more research on it, but I think it's kind of almost beating a dead horse. Talking about a disciplined life, and that discipline isn't something that you necessarily need to be going towards. And this is one that drew me pause. But the nuts and bolts of what he's getting at is that it's not discipline, all right? Setting out to do what you say you're going to do. What he's getting at is it's the power of habit. It isn't that you want discipline in doing those things. Those are great. That's great. However, it is difficult to foster that. It is far easier to create a habit. And so you form that habit of every day. What is the one thing that I can do? Such by doing it, I make everything else unnecessary or easier in regards to my particular goal, whatever that goal happens to be. It could be sales. It could be customer support. It could be your career and your career progression, getting a promotion. What is the one thing that I can work on today, this week, this month? Isolate those things and focus on that one thing. And I'll add on here. If you get that one thing done, then great. Then ask yourself again, what is the one thing I can do now that by doing it is going to make everything else unnecessary or easier in relation to my goal, in reaching my goal? So you focus on getting one thing done at a time. It's the opposite of multitasking. If you create the frame, then you can master the game. That's right. And it's all about questions and answers. If you want better answers, ask better questions. And that's a fantastic question. I'm a big fan of this particular book. Those with the right habits seem to do, and getting into this disciplined life, those with the right habits seem to do better than others. They're doing the most important things regularly, and as a result, everything else is easier. You build one habit at a time, and he discusses in here that it takes 66 days to create a habit. And there's a wide range. Some people say it's 21 days to create a habit. Some people say it's 128, somewhere over 100. All right, he isolates it down to 66 days to form a habit. Form one simple habit. Then form another habit. Over the 66 days, you're talking about 6 habits that you could create over the course of a year. All right, this is a really good illustration of how our mind works and how we split our focus. Because developing 6 habits seems, at least to me, really like setting the bar low. Like, I can't create more than 6 habits over an entire year. Well, the answer is you might be able to, but you probably won't. And what happens is you don't get your focus on the highest priority. We go back to that initial example where you give your staff 5 things to do, and invariably they don't get all 5 done. And one of the ones that they didn't get done is either your top priority or second top priority. So focus on getting one of those things done, those things that matter most, your biggest priority, the one thing that's going to move the needle for you in relation to your goals. Get that one thing done, form that habit, then get on your second thing and get the second habit. So it's not that it's 6 habits, more than 6 habits that you're forming, it's your 6 most important habits that you would be forming over the course of the year. And if you can form 6 hyper priority habits in relation to health, wealth, mind, spirit, body, all of those things, if you start forming solid, your biggest priority habits, going to the gym every day, for instance, reading every day, for instance, those are transformative habits. So it isn't that you are working on, say, less habits, you're working on your best habits. And then if you can say, okay, I'm going to work on 6 habits that are going to change my life, basically, then that's the sort of thing that is going to change your life. All right, 6 habits that work. All right, so that's what he's getting at with the whole disciplined life. It's not discipline we're really after. It's about habit forming, because habit forming then happens naturally and doesn't require the effort of discipline. All right, willpower is not always on will call. So that's the 4th lie that we tell each other or tell ourselves, is that where there's a will, there's a way. If I'm struggling with something, then I just need to focus my willpower on it, and I will be able to get things done. The fact is, and I've done a bunch of research into this as well, willpower is a finite resource. And it is not always on will call. All right? It is most active. There's all kinds of studies on this, where it's most active at the beginning of your day, or right after a break, or right after a meal. Your mind absorbs like 25% of the calories in your body. All right, if you're hungry, your mind isn't going to be functioning right. However, you will be able to function right after a meal. And they've done tons of studies on this, where those individuals who are able to have a snack perform better on tests than those that don't, or are able to make better decisions as far as what they're going to do later on, as far as studying or what have you, making the correct decisions. Same thing with breaks. There's a big study that I'm a big fan of by Jonathan Levav out at Stanford, who found that parole board hearings, and this was a number, this is like 15 months worth of parole board hearings in Israel, the judges were less likely, almost on a graph going straight down, to grant parole to people if they were hungry. However, once they had a break, it shot back up, all the way up into like 60% chance of getting parole, all the way back down to 0 before the next break. And so they saw this play out as well. So be mindful when we talk about the one thing that you're going to be working on. Do it at the beginning of your day. Make sure to have a snack before you work on it over the course of your day if you pick it up in the middle. Or maybe set it up to be done right after lunch or right after another break. Something like that. Be mindful of where you are putting your one thing, your highest priority thing. And that, I mean, that lesson in and of itself could transform how much productivity you have if you're just mindful of when your mind and your body is working at your best. Eslam, so good to see you here. I'm glad you tuned in for it. A balanced life, I like this one. The first thing that's brought up in this, as far as having a balanced life, is it's an illusion. So if you look at, angry is bad news, darn right. So if you look at, say, a ballerina who's doing a pirouette or who's standing on her toes, it isn't that she's standing on her toes and her toes are still. There are 100 little movements that are being done, very small movements that are bringing that into balance. You're never absolutely balanced. You're always flowing on one side or another. Balance beam, riding a bike, all of those things that require balance are an illusion, all right? The interesting point that he brings up here is that the reason we shouldn't pursue balance is that the magic never happens in the middle. Magic happens at the extremes. And so I'm a big fan of, say, work-life integration. Finding a way to weave your personal and your professional together. All right, but what he's talking about here, what Gary Keller is talking about here, is really diving in and really focusing. What is the one thing that you need to be passionate about in work today? And once that is finished, then what is it that you can do in your personal life? What do you need to get done? What is the one thing you need to get done in your personal life? And dive into that just a little bit more. That's hugely important. Willpower is a direct correlation to sleep and sugar. Yeah, I love that. That's great, Brian. I didn't see that one. I just saw it there at the end. You had a long business day today. So what work-life balance, he says, is a little bit of an illusion. Yes, I'll go along with that. But he's looking for extremes, extreme focus on one or the other. And what that does is that causes things to be out of balance. And so this is something that you need to manage in the end. You may be out of balance for work, but then at a certain point you flip the other side and you're out of balance on the side of the personal as well. And as long as those things come into balance in the end, that's what matters. But as he says, the magic happens at the extremes. And it's interesting, I can't come up with a personal correlation or example of that, but I'll kind of go along with it because I know that there's been times where I've been certainly out of balance, and it's almost been more of a necessity than anything. But work-life balance, a little bit of an illusion. Don't be afraid of going to an extreme as long as that's balanced. And if you're constantly evaluating that sort of thing, you're going to find yourself coming less out of balance as that goes along. The other thing, the last lie that we tell ourselves is that big is bad. And I liked this one particular comment that he puts in there. There is a fear that big success brings crushing pressure and stress. When we connect big with bad, we trigger shrinking thinking. All right? And I absolutely relate to that. If you have huge success, then you have huge crushing responsibilities, and there's stress that goes along with that success. And so we create this natural subconscious shrinking thinking, as he causes it, but kind of moving away from, or a deterrent toward moving towards success, because if we go for that big success, we're likely to have big issues that come along with it. Mo money, mo problems, as the great philosopher Sean Diddy Combs said. So moving out of that, yeah, think big, don't order off the menu. So I like, so he talks about thinking big, because this goes into kind of goal setting, and we start getting into the nuts and bolts of the one thing. But don't be afraid to push the limits a bit. We tend to make those limits hard to recover from. Brian, I really appreciate your responses, and that's just nailing it right there. Talking about big thinking, all right, because this gets into that goal setting that you need, the nuts and bolts of the one thing here. And that is, you want to think big. So set the bar high. If you shoot for the stars, you're going to hit the moon. That sort of thing. I'm glad you like it, Andrich. And happy to do it. I get plenty out of these books. I mean, I've read this book many times, and I still get something out of it every single time. So it's an exercise for me as well. One thing I liked on here is don't order off the menu. All right? If you're looking for a big idea, if you're looking for big breakthroughs, they're not as likely to occur from something that's already happened before. So what's a new thing, a new way of doing things? That's huge thinking, all right? And he draws correlations to Apple here, which has had a number of big thinking items that have come out, all right? And I won't belabor that, but those are the 6 lies, all right? Those are the 6 things that kind of hold us back, that inequality, multitasking, the fact that we're looking for discipline all the time when it's habits we should be looking for, that a balanced life is what we're after, when really being out of balance regularly is what actually causes all of the progression in our lives. And then not to be afraid of the big things and the big goals, that they don't necessarily come with more problems, big responsibilities, big stress. That doesn't always happen. Shirag, so good to see you here, by the way. So now we get into part 2, which is getting into the kind of the nuts and bolts of this process. Because it's great to say, okay, what is one thing that I can do today that by doing it, it's going to make reaching my goals easier, everything else related to reaching my goals easier or unnecessary. That's great. You ask the right question. That's the first step. But it doesn't mean that the answer just comes to you with the snap of the fingers. All right? So you first want to focus on what is your big thing. All right? So what is your big goal? All right? In 5 years, so we talk big goals, really, earth-shattering stuff. So look in 5 years or someday, find a big picture answer that points you at outcomes to aim for. Sorry, phew. As far as your spiritual life, your physical health, your career, your finances, your relationships, your personal life, where do you want to be someday? He throws that out there. Or 5 years from now, where do you want to be? In relation to that. And then what you want to do is you want to get big, first of all, but then get specific. And he draws the correlation here with sales. All right, we want to increase sales. All right, that's not specific. We want to increase sales this year by 5%. All right, that's specific, but it's small. What you want is big. I want to double sales in the next 6 months. That's big. That's specific, and that stretches your thinking, all right? And it's that stretching of thinking and really what isn't exactly explained in here particularly well, I think, is that the importance of stretching that thinking, all right? You set that big goal. You set that scary goal. You set that borderline impossible goal, because that's what stretches you to create ideas to reach that goal. With mind mapping these big goals and work backwards, go from why to what to how. Yeah, absolutely. And you start, that's where you start going with it. So why do I want to do it? What do I want to accomplish? And then how? And you just start breaking it back down a little bit. And he'll go through a little bit of a process here at some point that breaks those down and starts the planning stage of those things. But even just setting specific, what appear to be unreachable, crazy goals is something that can stretch your thinking. Peter Thiel talks about this in 0 to 1, which I probably won't review, but I am reading. And that is, what if you take your 5-year goal, your 10-year goal, and you say, what if I had to do this in 6 months? That's a powerful question. And it requires some strange answers, some new thinking. And I think that's an area that he doesn't touch on as much here as he potentially could, because I think that's a powerful concept to think about. And that's a great question if you haven't done that in your own thinking. Take your big goals, big 5, 10-year goals, and say, okay, well, what would it take to do this in the next year? Okay, you know, what possibilities does that open up? All right. So the goals, and he does break this down into 3 things, okay? Big goals that are doable, that are stretch, and that are possibilities. And you want to live out on that possibilities edge, because that's where, going all the way out of balance, that's where the magic happens, all right? A great answer, he lays it out here, a great answer is essentially a new answer. So you're looking for great answers to that one thing question that you have. Now, I'll tell you from personal experience, they don't come right away. Sometimes they do. Sometimes it's obvious. But a lot of times, they take a week, month, 2 months to really kind of percolate. And he talks about what to do later on in this. But look at, has anyone else studied or accomplished this or something like it? So your investigation begins by finding out what others have learned. So you're looking for a new answer. But that doesn't mean that you don't go looking at it for where other people found their answers or in what they did. What are some common threads that you can piece together from the different people? That can be a way of doing it. Absent, yes. And so if you can't find that answer, all right, so you want to accomplish something, whatever that happens to be, and you don't know what that answer is, then what you want to do is you want to get clear on your purpose. To what Brian said here in the comments, get clear on what your why is. And then you move in the direction of your why. And so you might not have a great answer, but you can start moving down the path. I talk about this a lot as far as procrastination is concerned and over planning. All right, too many times we don't take any action because we're just working the plan. All right, it's often better to start taking the obvious first steps that you need to take, and then the path illuminates itself down the road. And so that's what you want to do. If you have a goal to be in better physical health, but you don't necessarily know what that one thing is that you want to do, you can start going to the gym. You can start eating right. You can start on that path, go in that direction while you continue looking for that particular answer. And so definitely keep striving for the answer, because when you isolate that one thing, everything else becomes easier. It really does. So if I'm working from a mental standpoint, if I'm reading 100 books this year, that makes everything else easier. It's almost not a question of what books I'm going to read. Sure, I've got some frivolous ones to read on there as well, but then I also have powerful ones. And the effect is going to take place. If I'm looking to lose 25 more pounds, because that's going to make all of my other goals easier. It isolates what it is that I need to be doing. Now, I can change from running, I can change to lifting weights, I can change to focusing on eating. But as long as I am progressing down that path, I'm going to learn what works and what my one thing becomes each day, each week, each month on the way to that one thing end goal of losing that weight. All right. Same thing with your career. You may not know how to progress, but you can focus on doing something. Okay, I know I need to learn Excel, so let me start learning Excel. Okay, no, I need to learn PowerPoint as well. You start down that path, and eventually you start realizing, that one thing may be a mentor that you really need. That's the one thing that's going to make everything else easier or unnecessary. By the way, that would be my advice, is your one thing from a career standpoint is finding yourself a mentor. And I'm happy to be that person kind of online, but having somebody in the trenches with you is something I definitely recommend. Working all about priorities, and I'm not sure, there you go. So goal setting for the now. So if anybody's following along, it's page 150 that I'm talking about. And this gets into, Brian, what you were talking about as far as that plan is concerned. So you get to that someday element. So someday I want to, reach this point as far as my career is concerned, or I want to do this from a health standpoint. I want to have the ability to do this on a someday basis. Well, it's nevertheless, and it's the journey and the things you learn along the way. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more with you on that one, Brian. So what you do is, what's the one thing that I want to do someday? in relation to physical fitness. Based on my someday goal, what's the one thing that I can do in the next 5 years to reach that someday goal? Based on what my 5-year goal is, what's the one thing I can do this year to reach my goal? Based on my 1-year goal, what is the one thing I can do this month? Based on my monthly goal, what is the one thing I can do this week? What is the one thing I can do today? What is the one thing that I can do right now? And so you work on that staggered plan as far as reaching that someday goal by breaking into 5-year goal, a 1-year goal, a 1-month goal, a 1-week goal, a 1-day goal, and a 1-instant goal. So that's how you work that plan backwards from your huge and specific goal. That's what makes it not so scary. You can get big with some of this stuff because sequentially, if you keep taking the right actions, you'll be able to accomplish a whole lot more than you thought possible. I'll take a little bit of water here. Now, he talks about practice, and so it's like reverse engineering. That's absolutely, you start with what your clear picture of your goal is, and this is why when we talk goal setting, it's important to get very crystal clear on what that goal is, specifically what it is, because it helps you reverse engineer it. It helps you create the steps and the milestones that you need to hit to be able to meet it. And that all helps you break it down into individual bite-sized actions that you can take to reach that particular goal. Now, there was an interesting story in here talking about practice and how it isn't just about practice. And I know I talk practice all the time as far as your leadership mind is concerned. But if practice time were all that mattered over the course of our professional careers, with millions of memos and emails we type, we'd all progress from the lowly chicken peck form of typing to 100 plus words a minute. All right? But how many of us out there type at 100 words or more a minute? We all have, in this modern age, we all have more than enough practice typing. Why is it? We reach a level of skill we deem to be acceptable and then simply switch off the learning. We stop learning. We intentionally stop learning because we've reached a status that's okay. And you see this in all kinds of different places. It isn't just that you plateau naturally. You actually can consciously make the decision to plateau. I just found the example really interesting because that's one that everybody can relate to. Hey, some of you out there might type at 100 plus words a minute. Great. But most people don't. I haven't looked up what the average is. I'm sure it's 50 words a minute or something like that. But we have intentionally not learned to do it even better. And part of that is because we're probably focused on other things, but you have to bring intention to your practice. It isn't just practice. Practice doesn't make things happen naturally. There has to be an intention brought to your practice, and that's what makes it better. Now, you want to, if you're going to go down this route of the one thing, one of the things that comes in, and we talk about it with our employees all the time, is accountability. You have to hold yourself accountable. And so what you want to do is he isolates it down on page 185, where you have the accountable on one side and you have the victim on the other. All right? The victim avoids the reality. He draws the example of a store that is all of a sudden doing poorly. And the poor manager hopes that it's all going to turn around. Oh, it's probably just a blip. He's avoiding that reality. Whereas the great manager actually looks to see, okay, well, what happened this month as opposed to last month? Oh, wait, this competitor stepped in. And so they're seeking reality. That's this first step in being accountable, all right, is seeking reality, avoiding reality. If your numbers, if you're tracking metrics and they are going down, you need to be doing something about that, not hoping that it's going to turn around. All right? Seek the reality. What happened? Why did those numbers go down? Maybe there's a valid reason. Maybe it was something completely under your control that, or your organization's control that's going to get fixed for you. Maybe. But if you see those numbers going down, find the reality in those numbers and then take action. So you seek reality, you acknowledge reality, you own it, you find solutions, and you get on with it. That's the accountable mentality. So seek the reality and acknowledge it, own it, and take action on it. That's what's going to need to take place. The victim mentality and the way that's going to not get you any results, no matter how much you try to follow along with this book, is if you avoid reality, fight reality. That's not how I see it. That's the example that's drawn. You blame. If everyone else would just do their job. You find personal excuses. It's not my job. You wait and you hope. If it was meant to be, it'll happen. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. No, that's not the winner's mentality. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes you will win with that sort of mentality. That's the law of averages. That's statistics. But if you want to really win on a consistent basis, if you want to be making progress in your career, you can. You just have to get that reality, seek that reality. Ask your boss why it is you haven't been promoted. What traits that you need. And then take action on what they tell you once you get it. All right? Not the boss must have it out for me. Or the other people weren't nearly as qualified. It's just because they were kiss asses. And that's why they got promoted. Find the reality. Am I wrong? Maybe those things were the reality behind it. But oftentimes there's steps you can still take to actually get to where you want to be. All right? Now, the 4 thieves of productivity. All right? So you can set this intention, all right? You've got your one thing, all right? What is the one thing that I can do today to reach my goals that by doing it is going to make everything else easier or unnecessary? You can find that one thing, but you still actually have to get it across the finish line and get it done. And that's not always easy. So there's 4 thieves that he comments on here. I'm in chapter 17. And that is the inability to say no. All right, love it. The fear of chaos, poor health habits, and then an environment that doesn't support your goals. All right? When you say yes to something, it's imperative that you understand what it is that you are now saying no to. All right? Because, and I like this one, saying yes to everyone is the same as saying yes to nothing. You cannot get everything that is on your to-do list done, but you can get the important things done. And the only way to get the important things done is saying no to the unimportant things. So there's an art form to saying no. And I would love somebody in tomorrow's Mentor Minutes episode to ask me about how to say no to other people. And one of the things is give them a reason for the no. I'll give you a brief little synopsis. So, I'm sorry, I can't do that because of such and such. So give them a legitimate reason, or give them another option. All right? I can't do that now, but I can do it tomorrow. I do have time on my calendar for tomorrow. I can't do that right now, but you know what? Cameron, I believe, has some time, and I can give it to him to do. So you give them options. All right? So give them the reason and give them options. And there's nothing wrong with actually mixing those two together. That's a simple way of saying no a little bit more often. And then, getting back into... So, talking about chaos. So one of the things that happens is the thief of productivity is trying to get that to-do list done. You have to get used to having clutter. All right? Because as long as clutter almost by its very nature is unimportant stuff. Clutter is the wadded up pieces of discarded paper. All right? Clutter is that unimportant. You have to get comfortable with that unimportant stuff not being done and being around you so that you can focus on the important things that are taking place. Managing your physical energy, all right? Poor health habits. This is sleep and sugar equal willpower, I think is what Brian put on there. Absolutely the case. You have to mind your physical body so that your physical body can mind your mind. All right, you need to be focused on that. And then you have to have people around you that are going to work with you and help you to achieve your goals. So summing this up, again, The One Thing by Gary Keller, fantastic book, highly recommend that you pick it up. It's great for your professional life and it's great for your personal life. There's very little downside to the philosophy that's being talked about here. And the idea is that the minority of your decisions and the minority of your actions in any given day lead to the majority of your results. And you can just look over this past week at the things that really you felt really accomplished with, or that really moved the needle as far as progressing towards the goals of your organization. And you will find that those activities took up a very small amount of the time that you invested this week in those. Probably 4 hours or less of a 40-hour work week. So the idea behind The One Thing is to isolate those things. All right, what is the most important thing that is going to help me reach my goal, that is going to make everything else easier or unnecessary? That is kind of the mantra, the constant question, the powerful question to ask yourself each and every day. So it isn't just the Pareto principle of 80-20. It is taking the 20% of things that matter and then finding the 20% of that 20% that matters most and working on those things. Too many times we prioritize really well and we know what our top 5 priorities are, but we still seem to avoid priority 1 and priority 2, and we focus on the other 3. Focus on those most important things. Isolate that. When you get done with that, then ask yourself the question again. What is the one thing that I could be working on that by doing it will make everything else easier or unnecessary as far as reaching my goal? Extend it out. Personal life, professional life, spiritual life, friendships, relationships, finances, all of those things. Utilize this. And what you'll find is you can actually, I want to say, clear out the clutter. Because you give yourself a bit of a pass on all of the unimportant stuff. Because if you spend 40 hours of this work week instead of 4 hours on those most impactful things, how much further along could you be? That's kind of the promise behind the one thing. So if you have any questions for me on it, go ahead. You can direct message me on Facebook. You can email me, cm@CameronMorrissey.com. You can drop down into the comments. And Shirag, has it in stock. And Shirag, I definitely recommend it, and I hope I inspire a bunch of people to read this. Next week, it's going to be one of my favorites, Who Moved My Cheese? And we will be hitting some of the classics as we move along through these book discussions. I think it's worthwhile to reread some of these things. The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People I'm going to get to in the next month or 2. All right? I've read it, but I haven't read it in the last 8 years. My whole worldview has changed, and I'm going to bring something new to that particular text, and you can too. Sure, you read How to Win Friends and Influence People 20 years ago. That's great. What can you pull from it today? All right, so we'll reread some of those classics, and I encourage you, even though if you've read them, read them again, and you're going to pull something different from them. The classics are always good that way. Anyways, I hope to see you next week, next Thursday, 12 o'clock p.m. for Who Moved My Cheese. It's a simple one. You can pick it up. You can order it from Amazon. It'll be here on Monday or Tuesday, and you can still finish it up because it takes about an hour and a half to read. Thanks for sticking around, Andrich, Shirag, and then Brian. Always good to see you here on these book discussions as well. Everybody take care out there, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.